Hey guys, it's James here. The VSX Headphone System by Steven Slate Audio has been out for just over 2 years, and I've heard mostly positive feedback from people who bought them. Version 2 was just released last year, and after using it for about 6 months as a professional audio engineer, I'm here to give you a balanced review and discuss if it's something that's worth buying for yourself. Just like my other reviews, I'll try my best to be unbiased and address both the pros and cons of this headphone system. Keep in mind that this is not a tech review. I'm not going to go over all the features and specs. Instead, I will share with you my experience with it as a working professional. I want to first talk about what the VSX headphone system is for those who might not be already familiar. It's essentially an emulation system that emulates the auditory experience of listening to audio with various playback devices in various environments. For example, it can emulate the experience of listening to a pair of Amphion 218 monitors in a specific music studio. The selling point is that you get accurate, professional monitoring without having to spend money on buying speakers and treating your room. It's obviously more than just that, but that's the gist. As a concept, this sounds amazing, not only because it would significantly lower the capital required to enter the recording industry, since now people wouldn't need tens of thousands of dollars to build a studio, but also because it gives working pros a means to do work outside their studio. Such accessibility is great for everybody. Well, except for those who like to gatekeep. So does the VSX system achieve what it's marketed for? After using it and testing it in my studio for the last 6 months, I would say mostly yes, with some drawbacks. Let's talk about the good stuff first. The biggest advantage of VSX for me is that it really makes it so much easier to create translatable mixes with headphones. One of the major issues with mixing on headphones is their lack of crossfeed, which refers to the natural blending of the left and right channel of stereo audio when you're listening on loudspeakers. Essentially, when you're listening on loudspeakers, both your ears can hear the sound coming from out of both speakers, whereas with headphones, only your left ear can hear the left channel and only your right ear can hear the right channel. This is what makes it hard to manage stereo imaging on headphones, and I personally also find it harder to accurately judge transients and effects mix levels. And so, it's harder to create mixes that translate across different playback systems using headphones, unless you really train your ears to do that. With VSX, this issue of the lack of crossfeed is gone. That being said, VSX is not the only system that addresses the lack of crossfeed in headphones. Though not an emulator, CanOpener by Goodhertz has been a popular plugin for making headphones sound more like loudspeakers for many years now. So naturally, I did some comparisons. CanOpener is a much more simple plugin compared to the VSX. It doesn't require a specific pair of headphones, and it mainly focuses on adding crossfeed to your headphones so that the stereo imaging is not so unnaturally wide. And it does a good job of doing that. However, CanOpener doesn't emulate any speakers or rooms, so even with crossfeed, the audio still sounds really dead and close to my ears. It doesn't really resemble the experience of listening to actual speakers. In contrast, VSX gives me an entirely different monitoring experience that is way beyond just adding crossfeed. Switching between the two plugins on my VSX headphones, I could clearly hear that the VSX plugin emulates not only specific speakers but also the room acoustics. Slate claims that the VSX accurately emulates the rooms they modeled, but it's almost impossible to verify that claim since most people can't physically go to those rooms, and different people also hear the same sounds differently due to a variety of factors such as age, shape of ears, and bone density. So I wouldn't take that claim for anything more than just marketing. The VSX plugin does have an ear profile configuration that allows you to tweak the emulation precisely because everybody's ear's shape is different. However, I didn't find it to be very useful. The differences in mix are subtle, and I'll wager that you can not touch it and get used to how the emulations sound, just like how our ears would naturally get used to the room acoustics in our studio. I mean, it's not like you know how it's supposed to sound when they modeled it anyway. By default, VSX can emulate 15 listening scenarios, excluding any expansion packs. Aside from professional studios, it also emulates car stereos, an audiophile listening room, a boombox, and several headphones. Some of these scenarios have different modes for you to choose from as well. For example, in the Sonoma studio, you can choose between the near fields or the mid fields. Similarly, in the nightclub scenario, you can choose between a flat mode and a bass mode. The one I love the most for mixing and mastering purposes is the mid fields in the Archon studio. This setup sounds almost exactly like how my Atom A5Xs sound in my studio. I know, completely different speakers and rooms in real life, but somehow they just sound almost identical in this case. I'll surely take that as a win. Because of this, doing mixing and mastering work with VSX didn't really require much getting used to for me. Having talked to multiple professional audio engineers who also have VSX, I found out that the arch and midfields seem to be a common favorite as well. Having said that, the other professional studios in VSX sound rather off to my ears, and I found them to be unsuitable for mixing and mastering purposes, at least for me. The midfields in Steven's mix room, for example, almost sound like there's some comb filtering going on. But of course, every professional treated room has its own characteristics, and it's just a matter of getting used to the sound of the room as the audio engineer. It doesn't mean that this emulation is bad or unusable for everybody. I'm sure someone would find Steven's mix room to be the best one for them. I also found the AirPods emulation to be really off. I have a pair and they really don't sound like the VSX emulation at all. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the things I don't like about the VSX system, so you can take both sides of the coin into consideration when deciding if this system is for you or not. First of all, it's not the most comfortable headphones I've ever worn. Naturally, how comfortable a pair of headphones is highly depends on the shape and size of your head and your ears. For me at least, the ear cups of the VSX headphones don't really sit nicely over my ears. It almost feels like they can't curve inwards enough, and so while the tops of the cup is nice and tight, the bottom feels rather loose. My Sennheiser HD600 and Audio-Technica ATH AM20X feel a lot more comfortable and snug in comparison. Because of the discomfort, it's hard for me to work with the VSX headphones for a long period of time. I've noticed that I have to take them off every 30 minutes or so. Keep in mind that I wear glasses, so that could be a factor. The second thing I don't like about VSX system is not necessarily about a flaw in the product itself, but rather about the fact that it gives you access to so many options with a click of a mouse. Professional engineers know the importance of getting familiar with how your speakers and room sound and learning how to create translatable mixes in that specific environment. It can take weeks, months, or even a few years to achieve this. As an example, the mastering legend Bob Cass said in a podcast episode that he believed the best way to create a translatable master is not to play it on different kinds of playback system and make sure the master sounds good on all of them, but rather the best way is to have one reference system that allows you to create masters that are translatable in the first place.
Take your 8040s, make them sound as good as possible. Mix with those. Learn every part of it that you can trust, and the parts that you can't trust, keep trying to improve until you can trust them. But don't have any other headphones or loudspeakers in that room, because every time you switch to them, you start getting doubts. You start hearing, well, these speakers do better at this, so maybe I should put in a little bit more 200 hertz because that sounds better on the XYZ speakers. But wait a minute, the ABC speakers sound worse when I add the 200 hertz. And all you're doing is confusing yourself.
Obviously, this is just his opinion, but given his status in the industry, his words have incredible weight. With VSX, a novice or amateur engineer might be tempted to constantly switch among the different VSX studios when they're trying to create a mix, rather than picking one room and trying to mix well in that room first. This could potentially hinder their progress in learning how to mix. The last thing I don't like about VSX is that I find it harder to dial in subtle room reverb with the VSX system, mostly because the room emulation already has a bit of room reverb on its own, so adding some subtle room reverb to a vocal is like dealing with two reverbs on top of each other. Of course, there's room reverb too when you're mixing on speakers, but it's different because it's not coming from the speakers. Perhaps some people can get used to this. I just couldn't. I'm also aware that you can adjust the room reverb level via the depth knob in VSX, but the audio starts to sound a bit unnatural when it's turned all the way down. Here's my take on the VSX system. I think it's great. While no one can realistically verify on a technical level how accurate the emulations are, it's certainly not a gimmick and it does what you expect it to do. I wouldn't think of it as having NRG or ATCs in the plugin, but it's more of an excellent solution to many common obstacles that musicians and audio engineers face. If you don't have the budget to treat a room, or if you don't have a spare room that can be acoustically treated, now you can use the VSX for critical listening, to learn to mix, to master, and to become a professional audio engineer. If you are a professional who wants to do some audio work on the go, VSX is certainly a much better option than just a pair of regular headphones. My hope is that eventually emulation technology like VSX will be mature enough to completely replace the need for real speakers for mixing and mastering. This way, audio engineers can no longer feel the need to buy expensive speakers to make their studios look more legit to musicians, or just to get a 10% improvement from their last pair. Diminishing returns is a real thing when it comes to high-end audio gear. The competition among engineers, then, will be solely based on skill level, work ethic, and client service. Right now, unfortunately, studios with flashy gear can seem more legit to musicians, and I definitely don't believe that's how it should be. I hope that VSX-like technology can allow professional audio engineers to offer musicians high-quality services with much less overhead and therefore more affordable rates. Am I going to replace my studio monitors with VSX? No, and that's simply because I have had the privilege and luxury to build a dedicated studio for mixing and mastering. But when I'm not at a studio and want to do some studio work, I use the VSX system. Can someone get professional mixing and mastering results with only the VSX system? I absolutely believe so, if the person is an excellent audio engineer. That's it for the video. Give it a like if you find it helpful and informative. And subscribe if you want more music production content. Happy mixing, and I'll see you next time.